Okay, hi everyone. Today I'll be talking about external possession and the VP phase edge in Pangasinan. So, external possession involves a nominal which is semantically the possessor of another argument, yet syntactically, this nominal is separate from its possessor VP. So here's a famous example from German. So in one, we have the neighbor, which is the possessor, being marked with the dative case, which is separate from the possessor marked with the accusative case. Today, I'll investigate the phenomenon of external possession in Pangasinan, which is a northern Philippine language. So, although external possession has been attested to in other Austronesian languages, I'll show that in Pangasinan, this phenomenon differs. All my uncredited data today will come from original field elicitations with native speakers of Pangasinan. Here's an overview about what I'll be looking at today. So I'll start with some preliminaries with the language, and then we'll look at some basic characteristics of external possession in Pangasinan. Next, we'll look at a proposal analysis, and we'll look at extraction patterns before concluding the presentation. Let's start by looking at some preliminaries in the language. Pangasinan is a predicate initial language with relatively free post-verbal word order. So I'm sure everyone's already familiar. The language displays a Philippine type voice system. So the pivot arguments are marked with nominative case, or they might also be marked with demonstrative, which I'll talk more about later. On the other hand, other arguments will receive either genitive or oblique case. In 2A here, we have active voice clause, which selects the Asian argument to be the pivot, which is marked with either the nominative case marker su or a demonstrative such as my. The non-pivot theme is then marked with genitive case marker la. Likewise, in 2B, we have a patient voice clause, which selects the theme argument to be the pivot to be marked with su or my. And here we have the non-pivot agent, which is the boy, being marked with la. Besides my, there are other demonstratives in the language. So the table on the screen here shows the full list of demonstratives. We have a yai series, which are proximate demonstratives. We have a tai series, which are distal demonstratives, and a my series, which are unmarked demonstratives, which I'll be using throughout this presentation. Any of these demonstratives in the table can be used to mark pivots in place of my. There are actually two ways of expressing possession in Pangasinan. We have internal possession, where possession pattern with non-pivot arguments in receiving the genitive case. So in 3 here, we have naplaksu aso lalaki. In this case, the possessor, which is the boy, is marked with the genitive case marker la. However, we can also have external possession in the language, and in this case, the possessor becomes marked with an article my, and we see an additional third-person genitive clitic pronoun appearing on the possessor. In 4, we have naplaksu aso to, my lucky. So here, similarly, the possessor is the boy, but instead of the genitive case marker, we see the demonstrative my appearing before the possessor. We also see to, which is a genitive clitic pronoun appearing on the possessor VP. Yeah, so the examples might get a bit long later. So like for ease of reference, I have italicized all the possessor arguments and bolded the possessor arguments. Note that in external possession, su cannot be used in place of my, even though both of them are pivot markings. In 5, we have naplaksu aso to su laki, and this is bad because external possessors can only be marked with the demonstrative my or any other demonstrative, and not the nominative case marker. We also cannot use the genitive case marker la to mark external possessors. So 6, naplaksu aso to la laki is ungrammatical. Now let's look at some basic characteristics of external possession in Pangasinan. Firstly, external possessors form separate constituents from their possessors. So we can tell when we use an adjunct separation test. In 7A here, we have the case of an internal possession, and when we try to stick an adjunct, saya nagu or this morning, between the possessor, which is the girl, labiye, and the possessor, which is the cat, supusa, this results in ungrammaticality. This is because in internal possession, the possessor and possessor forms a single constituent that cannot be separated by adjuncts. In 7B, however, when we have external possession, we can insert the adjunct between the possessor and the possessor because they are separate constituents. However, this does not mean that any material can just intervene between the possessor and possessum. When we have another argument appearing between the possessor and possessum, the sentence becomes very confusing. In 8 here, when we try to stick the theme argument la back between the possessor, which is my BA, the girl, and the possessum sunanaito, which is the mother, this results in confusion. This brings us to our next characteristic, which is the fixed word order. Post-verbally is required that the my mark external possessor follows its possessor. As seen from the previous example, it's preferred that this relationship is immediate and no arguments interfere. So in 9a, we have the case of a possessum before possessor. Ang awit la back sunanay to, possessum, my BA, possessor. This is good. However, in 9b, when the possessor follows, when the possessor precedes the possessum, as in ang awit la back my BA, possessor, sunanay to, possessum, this is then ungrammatical. The fixed word order might be due to the fact that my can also mark pivots in Pangasinan, so a sentence like 9b might result in difficulties with passing. The next characteristic of external possession in Pangasinan is that the external possessor occupies an athematic position. In some languages, external possession cannot co-occur in sentences where the possessor is not directly affected by the action of the verb. Here we have an example from Hebrew. In 10, Mom buttoned Danny's sweater. This sentence is actually infelicitous if Danny is not wearing the sweater when during the action of the buttoning. This is because Danny is not directly affected by the action of the verb. Yeah, so only when Danny is wearing the sweater, he's affected by the buttoning action, and this external possession sentence is felicitous. In these languages such as Hebrew, external possession has an affectedness requirement. External possessors thus occupy positions where they obtain an additional affective theta role. In Pangasinan, however, we don't see this semantic requirement for external possession. So external possessors can be inanimate, as in 11, we have the girl saw the tree shadow, the tree being an inanimate possessor. Or external possession can also occur with stative verbs, like in 12, the girl liked the teacher's cat, with like being a stative verb. External possessors in Pangasinan thus occupy a position where they do not receive an additional affective theta role. However, this does not mean that internal and external possession are semantically identical. We see a specificity distinction here, whereby bare common noun internal possessors are obligatorily non-specific, and bare common noun external possessors can either be specific or non-specific. To illustrate this, let's consider the following two contexts. The first context is a non-specific context. So in this context, the prince went to a ball with many girls, and he found a shoe belonging to one of the many girls. I'll call this the many girls context. And the second context here is a specific context where a prince was dancing with a particular girl at a ball, and when she left, she dropped her shoe, which the prince found, and he knew that the shoe belonged to that girl. I'll call this the unique girl context. Because internal possessors are obligatory non-specific, it is only compatible with the non-specific context, which is the many girls context. So in 13, when we have internal possession, this sentence roughly translates to something like, the prince found a shoe of a girl. It is infelicitous with the unique girl context. On the other hand, when we have external possession, because it can either be specific or non-specific, external possession is compatible with both contexts. So in 14, we have the external possession version of 13. And in this case, it can mean the prince found the shoe of a girl or the girl. Yeah, so it can be either the specific or non-specific context. I will return to this difference in specificity later in the analysis section. The next characteristic is that a salient part of external possession in Pangasinan is that verbal morphology is not affected by external possession. So in 15 here, we see the active voice. So in A and B, regardless of the possession is internal or external, we see that the verb remains the same, which reflects the agent pivot. Likewise, for PV clauses, whether possession is internal or external, we see the PV verb appearing. We can clearly see that verbal morphology here reflects the status of the pivot argument, which is marked nominative, and not the internal or external possessor. This differs from the behavior of external possession in many other Austronesian languages, where external possession is accompanied by locative or applicative morphology on the verb. Here's an example from Isbukun Bunun, a Formosan language. So in 17b, we have the external possession version, and here we see locative voice morphology appearing on the verb when the external possessor becomes nominative. Thus, this existing analysis where external possessors are hosted by some applicative projections, such as Nia's recent analysis of Tagalog, are not applicable to external possession in Pangasinan. Lastly, for the analysis of the external possession where possessors do not gain an additional theta role, external possessors can either be moved from a lower to a higher position, or it can just be base generated at the higher position. In Nez Perce, which is a language with possessor raising, when there are two internal arguments, only the higher internal argument can be possessor raised and externally possessed. So in 18 here, it's example from Nez Perce, and here we have our external possessor, which is the first person singular pronoun. In this case, the first person singular pronoun can only externally possess the beneficiary argument and not the theme argument. DIL 2013 attributes these to relative locality constraints, where probes are constrained to only attract the closest potential goal. Because these beneficiary arguments are higher than theme arguments, only the beneficiary arguments are subject to raising. In the double object construction in Pangasinan, external possession can actually occur out of both internal arguments. So in 19a here, we have an external possessor, the boy, my lucky, and in this case, the boy is externally possessing the beneficiary argument, which is the cat, Supu Satu. What is more surprising is that external possession can also occur out of theme arguments. So in 19b, we similarly have the boy as the external possessor, but this time, the boy is the external possessor of the fish argument, which is the theme argument, instead of the cat. If we were to posit that external possessors are moved to higher positions, being able to raise themes might entail violation of locality constraints. Thus, we might just assume that external possessors might be base generated in their current position. However, external possessors do not need to remain in their base generated position. They may optionally undergo A-bar movement. In 20 here, we have an external possessor, the girl, Amai BA, moving from a post-verbal position to a pre-verbal position. Here, I note that the clef my mark external possessor is not directly built into the higher clause. It must be base generated somewhere near the pronoun in the possessum DP and moved upwards. We know this because the movement is island sensitive. So in 21, we have an adjunct island and we have an external possessor raising out of an adjunct island. And this is ungrammatical. So from 21, we see that the external possessor, my lucky, must have been built in the lower phrase before being moved out to a higher phrase. Now I'll go into the proposal and analysis. So in this proposal, I'll follow Aldrich, Rakowski, and Richards and Lewine to adopt a phase-based analysis of Philippine voice system. So in this phase-based analysis, non-AV pivots move to spec Lil VP, where it usually becomes the highest argument at the Lil VP phase edge. In external possession, we see the external possessor base generated at the edge of Lil VP. Because as we have seen previously, there's verbal morphology inertia, this means that we do not need an additional applicative projection to host the external possessor. The mime mark external possessor at the edge of spec Lil VP then binds the possessor pronoun on the possessor. This is in line with the specificity facts we have seen in section 2, because according to Rakowski and Richard 2005's analysis of Tagalog, arguments at the edge of Lil VP typically behave like agents, which are usually specific. Common noun arguments internal to Lil VP are obligatorily non-specific. So if you recall, we talked about how internal possessors are obligatorily non-specific if they're bare common nouns, and how bare common noun external possessors can either be specific or non-specific. If we assume that external possessors are base generated at the edge of spec Lil VP, we can then explain why it can be specific. The question then is, where exactly is the external possession possessor located. To obtain an answer, we need to take a closer look at extraction patterns at the LeoVP phase edge. So in phase-based approaches to voice, only the highest argument in the lower LeoVP phase edge can be A-bar extracted due to locality restrictions. Here's what a typical spec LeoVP might look like without external possession. In the AV clause, because only the external argument is in spec LeoVP, the external argument is the highest argument that can be extracted and collected. In non-AV clauses, however, because the pivot moves to the outer edge of LeoVP, the pivot becomes the highest argument that can be collected. However, when we have external possession, the patterns of A-bar extraction differ. When we look at these extraction patterns, we can help to look at how the LeoVP phase edge might be organized. Considering only AV and PV, we have 4 types of clauses to cleft out of, and in each of these cases, there are asymmetries regarding which argument can be extracted. Because in the phase-based theory, only the highest argument can be collected, I propose that in each case that we will see later, the phase edge is organized in a particular manner. In particular, we will see that the external possessor must be at a position where it can bind the pronoun on the possessum DP, but it must do so at the lowest possible position. Now let's consider each one of these cases. The first case is when we have an AV verb and external possession occurs out of the Asian pivot. In these cases, the external possessor can be extracted. In 22 here, we have the teacher or Amai Guru as the external possessor of a pivot Asian to assistant to. And in this case, we can cleft the external possessor. On the other hand, perhaps surprisingly, the Asian pivot in this AV clause cannot be extracted. So in 23 here, we have su assistant to being extracted, and that's ungrammatical. Again, assuming that only the highest element of LeoVP can be extracted, this means that the external possessor must be higher than the Asian pivot argument. Now let's take a look at AV clause where there is external possession of the theme non-pivot. In these cases, the external possessor cannot be extracted. So in 24, we have Amai Guru, the external possessor of the theme not pivot argument, la pusato, and in this case, we cannot cleft the external possessor. On the other hand, as expected, the Asian pivot can be extracted. What this means is that when there's external possession of a theme non-pivot, the Asian pivot is higher than the external possessor. I make a note here that this might require adjunction of the external possessor to LeoV bar before LeoV merges in the external argument. Next, let's look at a PV case where we have external possession of a theme pivot. In these cases, the external possessor can be extracted. So in 26, we again have Amai Guru as the external possessor, but in this case, it's the external possessor of the theme pivot argument, supusato. In this case, we can cleft the teacher. Like in the AV case, in here, the theme pivot now cannot be extracted. What this means is that the external possessor must be higher than the pivot argument, which is higher than the external argument. Lastly, let's consider a case in a PV clause where there's external possession of an Asian non-pivot argument. In this case, we cannot extract the external possessor. So in 28, again, we have Amai Guru or the teacher as the external possessor, this time of the non-pivot Asian, and in this case, it cannot be clefted. However, as expected of a typical PV clause, we can extract the pivot theme. This means that the theme pivot is higher than the external possessor, which is higher than the than the external argument in this case. Thus, from these 4 cases, we see that the external possessor must be in a position where it's high enough to bind the pronoun in the possessum DP, but it must do so at the lowest possible position. Thus, when we have the external possessor binding into a non-pivot argument, the external possessor does not need to be the highest argument at the LeoVP phase edge, because it just has to be high enough where it can bind the pronoun in the possessum DP. Okay, I'll now just briefly conclude the presentation. So today we have seen how external possession in Pangasinan involves generating mind-mark argument at the edge of the OVP, which differs from other documented Austronesian languages. We have also seen that external possession requires a particular organization of the neo VP face edge, and this is because the external possessor has to be merged in as low as possible, while still being able to bind the co-index pronoun contained within its possessor. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have 10 minutes for questions and comments. Okay, Edith, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your really interesting presentation. Maybe I just missed something, but I'd like to ask a clarification a little bit on the analysis and maybe suggest a piece of data that you can tell me whether this is good or not. So if you're base generating the external possessor in the little VP phase edge, and this can be in either active voice or non-active voice clause, what is the restriction on what can be construed with the external possessor? It seems to me that anything in the clause could be construed with the external possessor, right? Because it just needs to C-command a possessive pronoun somewhere in the little VP, right? But are there any restrictions? So for instance, if you're base generating the external possessor above the external argument in a non-active voice clause, then can the external possessor be construed with the external argument in a non-active voice clause? Thanks.
Oh, yes, thank you. So yes, that is possible. So when we have, for example, a non-active voice, like a patient voice clause, we can actually still do external possession of Asian argument. The relevant restriction is that we cannot cleft it. Yeah, but we still can have it post-verbal. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Is that your question?
Oh, well, this is an ungrammatical example, right? So I'm a little bit, oh, I see, that's the extraction one.
Yes, sorry, I think I did not include it, but
It's
if you put
okay,
yeah,
I get it. I see
verbally,
it. So it's okay as long as you don't do extraction, is that right?
yes,
I just don't
right.
remember the data off the top of my head. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, then Ileana, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thanks for your talk. The data are super interesting. I just have a clarification question actually about the specificity that you talk about, because you say that in particular, not so much for the external possession, but for the internal possession, you say the possessor has to be non-specific.
Yes, that's right.
I'm just curious about this because this seems like an odd restriction to have in a language.
Okay.
So, and in fact, if you look at some of your, just kind of like your basic example of, sorry, I'm trying to look at your slides here, of internal possession, you have something like, the boy's dog fell. Right, in this example 3 on slide 8. I mean, there's probably other ones in here, but that sounds specific to me.
So are you talking about example 6 here?
I'm interested in the internal possession in example 3.
Ah, I see. Okay, I'm sorry. That's a mistranslation. It should be a boy's dog. Yeah. So regarding this non-specificity of internal possession, so usually in Philippine type languages, when we have like the voice system, the internal arguments which are marked genitive are typically non-specific. So this might be parallel to how internal possessors are non-specific because they are internal. Yeah, they're internal and not like agents, which are
Can you say, John's dog fell? with
Yes.
internal possession with a proper name?
Yes. So the specificity distinctions I proposed were for bare common nouns, internal, external possessors, yeah, and common names behave differently in that they're specific no matter whether they are internally or externally possessed.
What about every boy's dog, though?
That's a good question. And um, with regards to universal quantifiers, I don't think I have looked a lot on how it behaves with external possession, mainly because like it becomes a bit weird, the sentence. So I'm sorry, I don't think I have an answer for you regarding that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We still have time. Anybody else? All right. And Kaufman.
Hi, this is a really interesting talk and very unusual data, I think, for a Philippine language. I was wondering about, I was a little confused about one example. I guess it's like example 4 in your abstract, maybe around 27 in the slides.
Yep.
Is that the one? So I was just confused about the data that shows that there is an island constraint there.
Yes.
Oh yeah, maybe that's it.
Here, right.
Yeah, so I can believe there's an island constraint there, but why shouldn't a sentence like 21 be okay if my laki is coming from the matrix clause? So why shouldn't this be okay on an interpretation that I laughed at the boy because his sister bought the book, not being extracted from the possessor position, but just being extracted from, unless it's impossible to say akalakan ko amay laki. I don't know enough about Pangasinan.
I
But-
think
Mhm.
it's ungrammatical because of the difficulty of passing it. Because if you want to say that you laughed at the boy, this sentence will mean like I laughed at the boy because his sister or something. So like the two arguments of the by verb will be the boy and the sister, and then the speaker wouldn't know what to do with the book argument. So usually my speakers tend to reject matrix clause extraction when there are like more than two arguments.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, just as a suggestion also, you may want to look, if you haven't already looked at Resti Sena's old paper on this type of possessor extraction in Tagalog. I mean, it's different because there isn't this distinction between internal and external possession, but he has an old paper about possessor extraction, and the types of arguments that you can extract out of or construe with are very similar to what you're claiming for Pangasinan.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you.
We can still have a really quick one. So Micha is asking something to Dan in the chat. All right. So let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
And